all have Christmas traditions. Many of them develop unintentionally, but they're part of us. We've grown up with them, and they with us. They've been passed down and adapted from generation to generation, and culture to culture, family to family. They begin to be the things we most associate with the season. After a while, we don't even know why. They just are. When we rewind back to Christmas past, it's our traditions that stay fresh and real. We can hardly explain it. Can't tell others why we hold them, protect them, celebrate them, long for them. But it just wouldn't be Christmas without them. Snow, gifts, ham, lights, ugly sweaters, decorating cookies, sleigh rides, Christmas trees. We don't always remember why they're important, and so we assign new reasons to them. And with each new reason, we slip further from what Christmas was first designed and intended to be. Traditions give us a sense of comfort, security, and control during an otherwise season of chaos. They're attempts at familiarity during seasons of struggle and change. But they can too easily become idols, leaving us to take the easy way out instead of having to adapt and change. And then they become little more than our attempts at securing our own kingdoms. Even Christmas. We've heard the Christmas story so long that Jesus' birth seemed normal and traditional. But it wasn't. And it isn't.
God rarely shows up the way that we expect. Though we anticipate His moving, we normally put more hope in our traditions than His promise. Let's rewind back to the characters of the first Christmas. In Luke chapter 1, we see the story of Zechariah. This is God's first recorded revelation in 400 years from Him to man. And though we would expect it to come to a priest first, this conversation with an angel is anything but normal. It's enough to drive any faithful man to doubt. And when Zechariah doubts, it leaves him speechless. Literally, for 9 months he doesn't speak. When God encounters Zechariah, it leaves him disabled and vocationally inhibited. And then what about Elizabeth? She had been asking God for a child for so many years. And when she finally conceives, she's an old woman. Normally, pregnancies are a time of rejoicing, and for Elizabeth it was. But she kept herself hidden for 5 months so that no one would see that she's pregnant. Why did God take so long to answer her prayer? The reproach that she felt from being barren all those years, yes, God had taken that away from her. But now being pregnant, it brings new challenges and possibly new reproach. How would people respond to her being an old lady carrying a child young enough to be her granddaughter? Though this was an answer to prayer, this was an untimely pregnancy.
Here you go. Thanks. If Elizabeth's situation seemed ridiculous, Mary's would even seem worse. Because even though Elizabeth was old, she was at least married. She had been barren all those years, but her pregnancy would very clearly point to the hand of God in it. That wasn't the case with Mary. She wasn't married yet. The implications were clear. God could not possibly be involved in this pregnancy. This was not of God. That's not the way that He worked. Mary would be cast out of her relationship with Joseph, cast out of her community, and very likely her own family. By law, she could have been put to death. And so when she asked the question, how can this be? She was asking a biological question, but a fear-filled one as well. The angel says a beautiful thing, and when he answers that fear, he says, for nothing will be impossible with God. He could have said, for nothing will be impossible, but it's with God. And Mary recognizes God's hand in this, and she demonstrates her own faith by saying that she is the servant of the Lord. And she decides to surrender her will to what God is doing in His plan and His promise. What about Joseph? In Matthew chapter 1, when God breaks into Joseph's life, we see a man who's ready to do what's right, culturally and religiously, and divorce Mary quietly so that she won't suffer any public shame or scorn. But the angel visits Joseph in a dream and tells him that he is to take Mary as his wife, that this child is God's son, and that he's to name him Jesus, because he'll save his people from their sins. Joseph, with every right to do what was accepted religiously and by law, determined rather to obey God. So we've got a young carpenter whose livelihood was at stake. He would be whispered about. He would be cast out socially. He would have difficulty in gaining clients and having gainful employment. It didn't matter. He wanted to obey, and he chose to obey God. And he took Mary for his wife. And he did exactly what the angel said and named the baby Jesus. So when God breaks in, He doesn't come in and just do the impossible and the unexpected. He does what's unlikely and unacceptable.
God showing up on the scene upsets the culture and routine of all involved, from the young to the old, from the prominent to the peasant, from the barren to the fruitful. God shows up in a way that answers Zechariah and Elizabeth's long petition prayer, even though it seems untimely. But He also shows up in a way that is definitely not an answer to prayer for Joseph and Mary either. And then a priest is left speechless, unable to perform his priestly duties. 2 women are given untimely pregnancies, which even in the best of circumstances would provide new challenges and a disruption to their routine. And then a carpenter is labeled a lawless adulterer, prohibited from providing for his new family. When God showed up, worlds were rocked and dreams were shattered. This was not the way they had planned on it being. This was anything but traditional. We need to rewind to God's intent for Christmas, His promise, and allow Him to break through our traditions in order that He transforms us.
We need to rewind our understanding of God's promise and how He works. Maybe our traditions need to be tweaked. Jesus' incarnation, His life, would lead Him to death. So for Jesus, it was life to death to life, knowing that He'd be resurrected. There's no alternative for us. We're called to die as well. But for us, it's life from death, from life. Given life at creation, we chose death. Given life at the incarnation, Jesus also chose death, knowing that He'd be resurrected, knowing that the Spirit would raise Him from the dead so that He could re-gift life to us.
We have mistakenly made our traditions sacred and confused their significance with the promise of God. Take the Christmas tree, for example. I think unintentionally we make Jesus like the Christmas tree. Now, not in reality, but think about it. We go to the Christmas tree farm, we pick out the tree that we like, we cut it down, and we take it home to our place of safety and comfort. And then we decorate and make it look really nice, and we put it in a place of prominence in our home for everyone to see it. We like to put Jesus on display too. We like to put Him in a place of comfort and safety. But Jesus didn't come as a tree, He came as a baby. And I think sometimes we think because Jesus came as a baby that that's harmless. But Jesus coming as a child is anything but harmless. Jesus said that He didn't come to bring peace, but He came to bring a sword. Jesus isn't the tree. Jesus is the saw. And when he works in our lives, it's uncomfortable and it cuts deep. It wounds and it doesn't feel right. After we have rewound our minds to the true intent of Christmas, there is no turning back to a stale traditional approach to this holiday. Instead of holding on to what feels comfortable, perhaps we should become uncomfortable. Perhaps we should let him do his perfect work and fall down before him. Instead of merely finding joy in traditions we've made, we should find joy in what Christ gave. And what better way to celebrate what Christ has given us than to re-gift his love in total surrender to his ways instead of ours.